Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legal Helm. I'm your host, Bim Dave, CEO of Helm 360. Today's guest sits right at the intersection of justice, technology, and opportunity. Roger Roman is the co-founder and COO at LegalEase, a company helping people clear their criminal records so that they can move forward with their lives. Roger began his journey at Howard University and has since become a serial entrepreneur and a creator who brings together design, technology, and storytelling. His ventures have been backed by organizations like Google and Techstars, and he serves on the board of Starting With Today, a nonprofit supporting mental wellness in Black communities. At LegalEase, he heads product innovation, building tools that meet people where they are and support true second chances. Roger, it's a pleasure to have you on the Legal Helm.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here for sure. And looking forward to talking more about everything, everything that we've built so far.
So, Roger, just to kind of give us a little bit of background on yourself, I'd love to understand a little bit more about the journey from Howard University through to entrepreneurship and then obviously co-founder and COO at LegalEase. Maybe you could walk us through that experience.
Absolutely. I'll take you through that crazy journey, right? So it definitely wasn't a direct line, right? I didn't go to college saying, hey, I'm going to be this entrepreneur and build these tech startups. In actuality, I went to school with hopes of becoming an attorney. That was kind of the career path I was directed on. That's what my parents laid out for me long before I could make the decision myself. It was put into the books that I was going to go to school and become an attorney. And that was the path. I went to school. I was a English major, and I majored in English specifically because it would make me a better writer, right? And today, with the emergence of ChatGPT and everything, that's a that's a questionable field to jump into. But I wanted to be a better writer because it would prepare me for law school. Worked at a bunch of different law firms, had a few really high profile internships at some of the biggest firms in the world, actually, some global firms, and I did some work in the public defender's office, and I kind of touched law from all of these different levels, and prepared for the LSAT. I did really well, but when it was time to make the decision to go to law school, I kind of had soured on becoming a lawyer, right? In every instance, it just didn't seem like something that would be fulfilling for me and, use my best talents. And I was kind of in this rut, or not a rut, but I was just in this period where, I hadn't enrolled into law school, even though I had, great LSAT scores and everything. And I was really trying to figure out something to do. And one thing that I looked back on, in my years as an undergrad and my years in high school, I was always building something, or I had always had these side projects that I was working on, while I was in school or doing something else, whether it was, creating a nonprofit organization or, building a little side hustle business and things like that. And I looked at that and I said, well, those are things that I've been doing for as long as I can remember. And, I just did it because I wanted to do it and I saw some joy in it. And that's when I really started to look at entrepreneurship and building a business and as maybe that's something that I want to do, right? And I even had a second guessing moment where I was like, well, building a law firm is kind of the same, right? That would take the same muscle, right? But I really just stumbled into entrepreneurship from there. I've always been pretty known to do those types of things. So when friends were starting businesses or they were starting new ventures, they would often reach out to me and say, hey, what do you think about this? I want to bounce some ideas off you. And I pride myself on giving good feedback in that space. So entrepreneurship really just kind of found me. I had three friends around the same time. I'm trying to figure out my next move. I'm getting ready to graduate. Don't necessarily want to go to law school, and I need something to kind of stave off my mom and give her a good explanation of why I'm not going to law school, right? And a friend of mine came with an idea for a video game studio, a mobile game studio that he was working on, and with a couple other friends from college. And I was helping out, in a volunteer friend space, and the more I got into it, I thought that it was something that was viable, and I became a part of that founding team. And we went to California and we pitched and we learned. We were in way over our heads. We had no idea what we were doing. I mean, like completely green. None of us had, any background in tech or in the tech space. But I got the bug at that point, right? We failed miserably. Um, we were able to raise a little bit of money to start working on a prototype. Never got off the ground. Ran out of cash. Everybody went back. My my co-founder Lawrence was actually on that founding team. My co-founder of LegalEase, and he went back to law school, and the other guys went to pursue different things, and I stayed in California. Um, Moving back and forth from the Bay to LA, just kind of, couch surfing, figuring it out. And, my goal at that point was to work at any startup, any tech startup that I can get a job in, and learn this space, right? I had kind of gotten bitten by the technology bug, and I love that, you could build these things that really fundamentally change how we live, right? Whether it's at that time, consumer social apps were the big thing. It was Facebook, and then after that, you had Tinder and all of these dating apps and things like that. But the fact that you could build something from the ground and it could fundamentally change how people live their everyday lives, that was always fascinating to me. And from there, I just started to work, and I would take any job I can get. I worked at several startups in that time. I was everything from a graphic designer to a social media manager. Just whatever I could do at these different startups to more learn the space. And I knew in the back of my mind that I was there, and that was kind of my apprenticeship in terms of becoming a founder myself. I can learn from these founders, and that's really how it started. That was the beginning of it, the genesis.
Amazing. What a fantastic story to begin with. And then obviously you came to co-found LegalEase. Was there a particular moment or an experience that made you want to build something that helps people in this manner?
Yeah, and again, I kind of fell into that too, right? It's funny how, if you put yourself in these situations, these opportunities come along. So I'll fast forward a bit. I worked at those startups, and eventually I built an agency, right? A marketing agency where we worked with technical founders who were building something and they wanted to launch and go to market. They had the technical savvy, maybe they had the business savvy, but they weren't necessarily prepared to go to market, right? And we would come in, I would come in as a project manager or a consultant, and I would help them kind of lay out their go to market plan. And then we would help them execute, right? We fill holes on their team, whether it was, copywriting, graphic design, videography, whatever they needed to fulfill that marketing, that go to market push. And I did that for several years, and was had some success. I worked with some very good startups, um, and then there was one company that came along. It was actually a remittance company. They were building a platform to allow people to send money from the U.S. to Africa, to several African countries, and they were using cryptocurrency as an underlying base. And the lead dev there, we kind of hit it off. The guy who was kind of leading the dev team, and worked really well together. Had some success with that organization as a consultant. Fast forward years later, he actually left that company to start his own startup. And he was building a freelance platform for talent in Africa, right? So this was a platform that allowed, similar to a Fiverr or Upwork. What I didn't know at the time was that several of those platforms don't necessarily work for African talent because of the payment gateways. They work in countries like South Africa, of course, Nigeria, Kenya, like the countries that have kind of made their way in the tech space, but they didn't work across the 50 countries across the continent. So long story short, he was building that platform. He reached out to me for advice again, like what it seems to happen a lot. And of course, I became immersed in it and kind of dived in head on. And I was working as a consultant, and eventually he said, you should be a co-founder with me, and we should build this thing. And started building it. Um, we were able to scale that to 7 countries. We onboarded about 20,000 users. We got an investment from Google. We went through Techstars with that startup. That was my first Techstars run, and I did it again. We'll get into that later. Um, and one of the first checks into that company was my co-founder for LegalEase, Lawrence. He was a friends and family round, so he was on the cap table and he was invested in. He would be a part of our updates, and we kind of stayed in contact that way. And then he started pitching me this idea around expungements, right? I'm in the midst of building a company. I'm head down building, and I keep getting pinged, hey, I got this idea, Let me know what you think and check it out. And of course, he's an investor now. He's not just my boy. He's not just a friend, right? He's actually an investor in my company. So I can't just, hey, bro, leave me alone. I'm busy, right? I gotta kind of give him some leeway there and kind of give him some good feedback because he's on the cap table. He took a flyer on me. So I would indulge him and I would say, it seems like a good idea, but don't quit your day job. He was actually practicing law at this time, and I'm like, you're making pretty good money as an attorney, and you're doing really well for yourself. I don't know if you want to jump into the startup space. Um, and it just kind of stayed that, right? It was an idea he would play with, and he would kind of flesh it out more and more every few months, and eventually with that startup that I was working on, AfriBlocks, which is the name of it. We intentionally built that on the continent of Africa, right? So when we started, my co-founder, he was living in San Francisco, and that was right before the pandemic. He actually went back to Zimbabwe, and we intentionally built the team on the continent. Even though it was a Delaware C corp and all of that good stuff, we wanted to make sure the core team and the HQ was in the continent on the continent of Africa, and we had grown to a point where we had transitioned a lot of our roles in the states to talent in Africa, right? At that point, I was the only member of the team who was actually living in the states. I was in California at the time. Everyone else was in either South Africa, Kenya, or Zimbabwe. So everyone was 10 hours at least ahead of me, right? So I'm the person who's up at 11 o'clock at night when the team is just awake for the day, having these meetings. In addition to that, my cost of living was a lot more than everyone else's on the team. So now we've raised a little bit of money. We're starting to pay small salaries, not like market rate salaries, but people have to live, right? So we're paying money. And when it comes to me, it's 3x, 4x, 5x of what everyone else is getting paid. So the decision was made that I didn't want to cripple the company by, taking a bunch of money from the company. I didn't want to cripple the company anymore by being the only person who, is 10 hours behind and people have to make accommodations for my time and everything. So we started to phase myself out. I mean, I'm giving you the background. Phase my role out as a member of the team. I had invested my equity at that point. I got the company to the point it needed to be. I wasn't necessarily as important to the day-to-day operations. And perfectly, at that time, I just started to get more pings from Lawrence about this expungement play. And I had a little bit of time on my hand and we started building on it. And to be completely honest, I was very skeptical early on in terms of the market size and, the usability and even if it could actually grow, right? If this is something that can be built and scale, right? The scalability of it. But after doing some research and seeing that there was, this is actually a blind spot. Legal tech has been one of the spaces that has been reluctant to technology and advancement over the past 20 years or so. I would say the legal tech space is usually one of the last people in line to kind of take advantage of these new technologies, and we saw that in this space for expungements as we started building, and we realized that it was low hanging fruit, and there was no one tackling this on a nationwide scale. I know there's a very long answer to a very direct question, but I wanted to make sure you had the full picture of how I got to the
No, I
point
love.
of building this company.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's good to understand the journey, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people come in and say, I founded this company and there's such a amazing backstory to it, which you've just described really eloquently. So it's really, really good to hear that. I do have a side question before we jump into legalese in a little bit more, which is, did you manage to get a chance to go to Africa and visit any of the countries out there?
Unfortunately, no. So again, we started building that company in 2020, and at that point, my co-founder was here in the States. So it was like, oh, we're gonna go, we're gonna make these plans to go, and then unfortunately, and my problem is the least of the problems, but the pandemic, took hold, and for the bulk of the time I was working on AfriBlocks, we were in the middle of the pandemic, right? So the flight restrictions, and that's why my co-founder actually when he was able to get home to Zimbabwe, he stayed, because he didn't want to get stuck back in the States. He was there. He had a growing family and everything, and wanted to be closer to home. So unfortunately, man, no, I didn't. But there's still time, right? So I do have plans to take some trips in 2026. And to connect to some people who I've only met on Zoom, right? I've only met them via
Yes.
Zoom and via phone calls, and that would be fun. And I'm actually looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I had the pleasure as a child. So my family, a lot of my family were based in East Africa in Kenya.
Okay, gotcha.
So I had the pleasure of going to visit them. This is like late 90s, and at that time, it was like it was such an amazing experience because my grandfather was a lawyer based in Kenya, and he basically like kind of gave me a little insight in terms of like the justice system over there, and and that kind of influenced some of the reasons why I kind of ended up going into the legal technology field. But also just as a country, like it's so rich in terms of like the beauty and the kind
Yeah.
of the landscape. It just has so much to offer. So yeah, you must go there, and you need to come back and
Kenya, Kenya is
share your
definitely,
experience.
yeah, Kenya's definitely on the list. It's
Mm,
funny because,
mm,
working with a Pan-African team, right? Everyone,
mm.
touts the beauty and the fun of their country, right? And so,
Yeah.
we had Kenyan dev team members who, they would always brag about the beauty of their country and how great it was. And you hear the same thing from people in South Africa. You hear the same thing. So I'm looking forward to it. Everything I've seen and everything I've learned, as a person here stateside, looks like it fits the billing, right, and it lives up to the hype.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's jump into legalese. So for someone who's hearing about legalese for the first time, can you explain to us what the platform is and what does it do in simple terms?
Yeah, so I'll give you our overall mission first. So at LegalEase, we've started with expungements, but our ultimate goal is to build tools that allow people to handle non-complex legal matters without an attorney, right? So, we're not building an AI lawyer. We're not trying to replace attorneys. There are places of the law where attorneys are necessary, right? And we would advise you should probably have an attorney. But there are a lot of these areas of law that aren't complex, and people can actually handle them themselves, if they chose to do that. And that's where we're tackling, right? So the best comparison I can give is TurboTax. You know, if you had very complex financial system, in your personal life, you would hire an accountant, right? You would hire a CPA or someone who is certified and understands the inner workings of this. But there are certain times where you don't necessarily have to do that, right? So, maybe you just have a job, or you just have a very simple, straightforward financial situation, and you go to TurboTax to file your taxes, right? And TurboTax they're not acting as your accountant. They're not acting as your CPA. They're just guiding you and giving you the information you need to go ahead and complete this. And that's the mindset we took into building LegalEase. We wanted to build these tools that empowered people to handle this stuff on their own, so they wouldn't acquire those crazy legal fees that come with some of this stuff. They can get things done on their timeline, right? When you hire an attorney, you have to work around their schedule, right? Maybe they're in court, or maybe they have other things to do. You can schedule something 2 weeks out, and then that's a billable hour, so on and so forth. And it might not be necessary for something that's very black and white, like the area of expungements. Expungements are statutorily prescribed, so the rules that determine if you qualify, they're laid out in black and white. You either qualify or you don't. There's not a lot of gray area around it in most states. And it seemed like something that would be easily adaptable to technology. And that's why we jumped into it. And just for your audience, I'm pretty sure you have a savvy audience, with this being a legal podcast, but an expungement, or a record clearance, is the right of every person or every citizen, and the laws differ slightly amongst each state, to have an old record removed once you finished all your obligations. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I have a disturbing the peace misdemeanor that I was charged with 10 years ago, and it's still on my record. I want it expunged. I go through the process. I file a petition. The court approves the petition, and then it's removed from my record, meaning that when a background search is done, it doesn't come up. When a background search is done, whether it's for housing or employment or whatever, that record doesn't pop up. Now, the common misconception is that it disappears forever. It doesn't necessarily disappear forever. Law enforcement can always see it. So if you were arrested in Los Angeles, California, and you got it expunged, maybe Los Angeles, I shouldn't use it. Let's say Washington, D.C. If you were arrested in Washington, D.C., and you had it expunged, No employer can see it. No landlord can see it. Just no person on any of these third party background sites can see that. But law enforcement can still see that you were arrested on this date for this thing. Just wanted to put that clarification out there. And that's where we started. We started there because, again, like I said earlier, there was a gap in the market. It seemed like something that was very black and white, that we could use technology to make a more paper heavy, red tape process, and make it more streamlined and effective for the end user who we built for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it sounds like the human impact is big, right, with something like this.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about that. Like, there must be some stories in terms
Yeah.
of what your platform's been able to deliver in terms of impact to the people that are using it.
Yeah, on a macro level, I mean, on a macro level, I'll start there. Just being able to get an expungement can have a huge effect on a person's life. And what we've seen historically is that people have been kind of locked out of these opportunities, right? People who have representation, who have attorneys on retainer, or who have access to this information, they understand these things. But there are a lot of people who don't, who might be, at the bottom of the socioeconomic spectrum, who don't, maybe they don't even know about expungements, and if they do, they're just intimidated by the process. They don't have $3,500 to hire an attorney to do it for them, so they just kind of forego it and don't think about it. And that's a huge, huge burden, not only on that individual, but the economy as a whole, right? We're limiting, a person's ability to be socially mobile, to be economically mobile. We're limiting a person's ability to find better housing and improve their living conditions, because of a mistake they might have made, 10, 15 years ago, whatever that time may be. And the law says if you've paid your fines, you fulfilled whatever the court said you should do, whether it's community service or whatever, then and a certain amount of time has passed, you should be able to remove this thing. Um, there have been some studies done that say, a person who's had an expungement can improve their wages by 20 to 25%. The recidivism rates go down. And then on a more personal say, I can even tell you stories of people, we've had and why they sought expungements. I'll give you two really quick ones. One of our first customers when we were testing our MVP out was a young lady who was a CNA. She was a nurse's assistant, and she had hopes and dreams of becoming a registered nurse, which is a process that you'd have to go through, and then of course, right, and she had always kind of avoided moving up in that space because she had an incident on her record from years prior. I think it may have been 7 or 8 years prior to when she reached out, but on paper it looked a lot worse than what it was. So without revealing too much, I'll say she some years ago got into an argument with her boyfriend at the time, and they were in a public setting. And the argument got pretty intense, and they were both arrested. Right, they were both arrested for domestic violence. It was a misdemeanor. I think she did some community service, and she moved on with her life. And actually, the boyfriend that she was in that argument with, they ended up getting married, having children, having a happy family all these years later. Um, but because she had this domestic violence thing on her record, she avoided any opportunities where a background check, she just kind of avoided because she was it was an ugly mark on her record. She didn't want to be painted as a person who beats people, right? And that was the initial assumption you would get if you see domestic violence on anyone's record, right? Like, oh, you're not a good person, right? So she avoided those any situations where that would come up, and she didn't pursue any promotions or anything like that because of it. So for her, in her case, it was more of a mental block than it was a block, an actual block that stopped her from moving along. It was something that was in her head, and who knows, maybe because it was a misdemeanor and it was so old, no one would have cared and they would have moved past it. Or maybe she would have been judged by it. Who knows, right? We don't know that. But long story short, again, she was able to come to us. We helped her with that expungement, and she felt a lot of relief in terms of just being able to go out and go into these spaces where, she might have to get a background check. to move forward. So that was one where it served as a mental block more so than a real block. And then there was another guy, very unique case, because typically we hear people say, I want to get a promotion or I'm applying for this loan. This young man called and he was actually, he was very, forthright about, he didn't have the best time in his 20s, right? And we were talking 15 years prior to this conversation. He made a lot of mistakes, did a lot of things that he shouldn't have done that he regrets. But he paid the price and he went through those consequences and dealt with them, and he's moved on. Right, here we are years later. He's moved on, and he's completely removed from that lifestyle and has a family. And one of his children is playing Pop Warner football, or I think it was football. And one of the parents asked if would he volunteer to coach. He seemed to be good with the kids. He's there, he's around, whatever. We need extra coaches, we need extra hands. I have children who play sports, so I totally get it, right? Hey, can you help out and coach? And he was like, yeah, I'll do it. That's fine. I'd love to do it. And he jumped in, and I think after 1 week of him being a volunteer, he was notified by someone that, he actually hadn't passed the background check because, these things that he had in the past on his record, again, which were expungible offenses, right? And just be clear that, violent crimes, violent felonies, and crimes of moral turpitude are usually things that aren't expungible. DUI in some states you can't get that expunged as well. So when we're talking about things that can be expunged, we're excluding those, right? So he hadn't hurt anyone, it wasn't anything like that. But here we are, 15 years later. He has a family. He's an upstanding member of his community, and he can't volunteer to help his son's pee wee football team because of this thing that's holding him back, right? And that hurt him a lot, and it really made him do some self reflection, and and made him kind of seek us, in terms of how can I get this removed, because I don't want to come to this again. Not only was it a painful thing to have to turn the team down, but now there's questions from other people and people around about well, why couldn't he volunteer, and is this person safe to have around our children? All these things pop up because of this simple mistake, or I wouldn't say simple, but I'll say the mistake that he made years before. So the impact and the way that it can close doors on people are great. I can give you more and more stories, right? People are trying to apply for rent to own loans, or people trying to move into apartments in better neighborhoods and things like that. Like these stories, they come in constantly. But those two stick out because they were so unique, and it wasn't necessarily the block of having a criminal record, but the things that spawn from that, right?
Hey John, how do I find out what we've invoiced my client?
How can I view my outstanding WIP?
How do I submit my expenses again?
Do we have next Monday off?
Monday off?
It's exciting to have fresh faces at your law firm, but onboarding them takes a lot of time and a lot of energy when everyone is remote. You're busy enough as it is. Helm 360 has the solution. Just ask Termi, Helm 360's next level chatbot solution for knowledge management. Termi can answer many of your new hires' questions for you without distracting you or anyone else at the firm. This means fewer frantic emails, fewer help desk tickets, more time and more focused productivity for everyone at the firm. Working with Termi, you can have those eager new employees up to speed in a snap. They may never need to ask you a question again. Check out helm360.com/Termi to see Termi in action and find out how it can make onboarding new hires as easy as sending an email.
Yeah, no, that's. I mean, those are two really hard-hitting stories, to be honest with you, because it's one thing to build a technology solution that solves a problem, but actually, like, this is a solution that's changing lives, right? So, thank you for sharing those. So just talking a little bit about the kind of technology side of things a little bit more. So, at its heart, LegalEase is a technology platform,
Yes.
right? And as we know, as we see through our industry day in, day out, there's an increasing use of tech and combined with AI to help simplify the approach that we deliver to either a consumer or internally to a law firm in terms of how they solve a problem. I'd love to hear a little bit about, your kind of approach to building the platform side of things, and how you built a platform that kind of makes sense to the end user. What are the kind of principles of that kind of helped you deliver a solution that actually makes sense to the audience?
Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on that. And that's one of the things that when we first started building and we first went out fundraising, we ran into that and just researching the legal tech market, understanding that most platforms that are being built today or have been built in the last few years have been built to make the lawyer's job easier, to make them be able to charge more money for less work, more billable hours, and all those things. And our platform, LegalEase was born from the opposite of that, right? So, for context, my co-founder Lawrence is actually a practice. He's an attorney, right? And when he was pinging me, like I talked about before, one of the things that he would often mention is that I'm charging people, $1,500, $2,000 to do these expungements, and literally all I'm doing is having a 15-minute conversation with them where I get the details of the case, then I fill out a petition, I send it to the clerk. It's like it's literally an hour's worth of work, and I don't feel right charging that amount of money, but I'm a lawyer, I got to make money. This is how I keep my lights on. And there's got to be a way that we could do this at scale, right? He's like, yeah, if I built this, I would miss out on those clients. But I'd rather have thousands to millions of people I can help across the country as opposed to a few clients here in my state. And he was actually practicing in Mississippi. So the platform and everything we've built from there has always been to make it easier for the end user to be able to do this without an attorney, right? And it was never about making more money for the attorney. It was never about making the law firm more making the law firm more, I guess, technically enabled, right? And making it easier for them to onboard people and removing friction there. It's always been about delivering value to that end user that makes it worth their money. And we've stuck to that. That's a major ethos. That's why it's a part of our mission of building, tools for people to solve these non-complex problems without an attorney. That's kind of always been the baseline. And it's opposite. It's the opposite of most legal platforms that are really being built again to help the lawyer make more money. I don't think Look, I have nothing against attorneys. I admire a lot of the work. I've been on the path to be an attorney my entire life. I love the fact that the work that we can do. I love legal dramas. I'm a big student of just the history of the U.S. justice system in particular. But I do think I don't think we need to help lawyers make more money. I'll say that. That's not our goal. And we do understand that lawyers are critical to certain spaces, but you don't often hear about a lawyer deeming themselves an expungement lawyer. You hear about lawyers who are uh, personal injury attorneys, divorce attorneys, corporate lawyers, M&A, all of these things. But I don't think I've ever heard of a person say I'm an expungement lawyer. And expungement is one of those places because it's low hanging fruit. It's not sexy per se. It's a place that we can go in and actually build this for the end user. The same way, that again, TurboTax is doing that, solving that problem for people who want to file their IRS tax returns. They don't need any complex accounting, right, for their personal life. They just need this basic form, this basic form that needs to be filled out every year. And we've approached it the same way.
Yeah, no, 100% get that. So you talked about some of your early career and some of the entrepreneurial startups that you were kind of involved in, and I love the fact that you talk about some of the failure as well, because a lot of people don't understand that actually to get to a point of success, you have to fail many
Many
times and
times.
learn. Yes, yeah. So I'd love if you could kind of share any, like, maybe one or two examples of the lessons you learned through those failures that have kind of led you to some of the success you see at LegalEase.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I think the one biggest lesson or just kind of insight that I've gained is timing is everything in this space. You can be too soon, you can be too late. You can work on a project too long, or you can quit too early, right? And there's no silver bullet. There's no right answer on, or formula to put in place to know that, right? You just kind of trust your instincts and do your research. And the more you know about the market, and the more you understand about the space you're in, you can figure those things out. But I think understanding when to stop, and understanding when to be resilient and keep going. I think that balance, everyone says don't stop, and if you keep going, you're going to make it. And I think that's true to some extent. But also, there is a time where the writing is on the wall, and it's like, well, this is not going to work. We've pretty much run into a brick wall. We have to either pivot or, go back to the drawing board, and just kind of having the sense to understand that, and understand when we've exhausted every option to make this thing work. We've done every possible thing that we can, and there is nothing else we can do, and being confident in that, right? Not sleeping saying, well, I wish I would have done this. No, we've cleared we've cleared the to-do list on that side, and we're at a standstill, and we understand that this is not going to go any further. Now is the time to pivot into something else. I think just kind of gaining that muscle over the time, and I think you can only do that when you've had success and you've had failure, and you've been on the roller coaster of entrepreneurship. It's not just with tech. I mean, I think it applies to entrepreneurship across the board, and even for creatives, people who create. I think it's the same thing there as well. You do it so many times, you start to pick up on the ebbs and flows, right? And you understand that, okay, if I build this, 10 a.m. on Monday, I can get the best call in the world, and I can solidify a partnership with a partner that I've been courting for months, and then at 2 p.m. that same day, I can get 10 customers demanding a refund because something didn't work on the platform, right? And that's the balance of the day. And, being able to deal with that ebb and flow, and understanding that, even when things are hard, or even things don't necessarily seem to be moving in the direction you want, there are signals that to look for that say, we're on the right path, right? And being able to find those signals, and be able to use them as motivation when things might not look great, right? Maybe, the payroll is coming up, and, you got to pay people, and you got contractors and all these people, and you're looking at the account and money's going low and all these things. But, hey, we onboarded, 50 people this week, right? Or we've onboarded, 3 great partnerships, and this, and, so being able to balance that, I think, is the strongest muscle I've developed in the space, and understanding that. And I feel bad because there's not like a piece of advice I can give people. The most I would say is, be resilient. Of course, that's the baseline. Be resilient, and build, and, exhaust every avenue, exhaust every opportunity. And then at that point, when you feel like you've exhausted it, and you've tried everything, right? Then, if the writing's on the wall and it's time to hang it up, you can confidently do that because I left it all out. I mean, athletes will say, leave it all on the field, right? You've done everything, you've prepared as hard as you can, you've done everything there, and it's still not working. Then it's time to figure something else out. So I'm sorry that's not like a direct quotable piece of advice, but I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned, is just knowing when to keep going, and when to pivot.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. So I appreciate that. I'm sure the audience appreciate that wisdom from experience, right? Because it means a lot. When we look ahead and we look at the kind of future of LegalEase, what's next? Is there new states, features, partnerships on the horizon? Where do you see it going next?
Absolutely. So when we launched in late July of this year. The last week of July we launched, and we launched in Mississippi. And the reason we chose Mississippi, one, was because my co-founder practices law there. He's also a state representative in the House there. And Mississippi has one of the more paper-heavy court systems. It's probably one of the, yeah, it's paper heavy, right? There's not a lot of e-filing or technology involved in a lot of spaces for the consumer. There is for attorneys, but not for the consumer. So we figured if we could make it work in Mississippi, high incarceration rates, very high poverty level. If we can make it work there, then we can kind of replicate that in other states, right? And remove some of those barriers. So we launched in Mississippi last week of July. We anticipated having a few hundred people sign up, and we would kind of work with those, and learn from those first few hundred customers. To our surprise, that first week of launching, within 2 weeks, we had 3,000 people who had onboarded the platform from all over the country, right? Even though we weren't active in their states, right? And it was a lot of confusion early on because we didn't anticipate that. And that's what happens when you're building a startup. And we had to refund a few people because, they lived in Minnesota or they lived in Iowa or California, and they signed up and they paid money, and we weren't necessarily live there. So there was some learning there, but it excited us about the demand and the people who needed it. So we kind of sped up our timeline in terms of going into those other states. Before, we had more of a conservative rollout. We would, master it in Mississippi, then go to another state, so on and so forth. But we sped that timeline up, and we are in the process of piloting 5 additional states right now, actually. So we're looking to launch officially in the next few weeks in California, Texas, Maryland, Illinois, and Georgia, right? And those are the next states that are slated to launch. The goal originally was to be launched in those states this month. It's looking more like we're going to be launched in those states the first week of January. So excited about that. And one of the added components that we're building into the platform, or we've built into the platform, that wasn't there for Mississippi, is the ability to e-file. In Mississippi, because the process is so paper heavy, we actually generated a PDF petition for users to submit to the clerk. In many jurisdictions, they had to actually submit that by hand. With these new states, we've built in an e-file system where not only can they pay their state fees inside of the platform, they can send their petitions directly to the court clerks, and handle everything in our ecosystem. So excited about that, excited to roll that out over the next few months. And then from there, it's really just about expanding to each state, building those workflows out for every state that offers record clearance. Right now, there's 48 states that offer some form of record clearance, 2 states that offer a very complicated pardoning system, and we haven't worked that out yet. But for those 48 that offer record clearance, we're slated to expand to each one over the next 18 months.
Amazing. Sounds like a good and exciting period ahead. So wish you all the best
Yeah,
in
it's
the
exciting.
expansion of your platform.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
exciting. It's
yeah,
challenging, right? As any founder would know, as I'm sure you know, like there's a challenge. You deal with challenges every day, but it's definitely exciting.
indeed. So Roger, I'm just going to move to a couple of wrap-up questions. The first of which being, if you could go back to yourself at 18 years old, what advice would you give yourself?
Buy Bitcoin now. I'm joking. Yeah. 18, I would say, that's tough. I mean, I think trust your gut. I would just tell myself, I think, everything, even when times were dark and it didn't seem like, this was the right path. I was able to stay resilient, but there was always times where, we're human, right? You doubt if you've made the right decision. And I would just give myself the assurance, trust your gut and everything will work out for you.
Yeah, amazing. Good advice. And on you kind of mentioned this, and I think resilience is a key part of being an entrepreneur, right? But on those difficult days, what's the personal why for you in terms of like what motivates you to carry on and get past those difficult days and keep moving forward?
Ooh. So I think that's multi-level. One, on a personal level, I've always chased greatness, I guess, and been a high achiever, and things have kind of worked out that way for me in life. So, personally, I'm always looking to impress myself, right? And do more and kind of achieve more. That's a big why. I do have a almost delusional belief in myself, um, which I think, you got to kind of have that as an entrepreneur. You got to be able to figure out problems and solve things. And so that's there. And then, of course, I have children. I have a wife and a family, and, I have 3 lovely children, and, they motivate me every day, right? You're seeing them be happy and be able to experience things because of the work that I do, right? So, I think just the personal motivation is there in terms of wanting to achieve and wanting to accomplish things and build things. It's part of my DNA. But also, of course, just being a dad and being able to create experiences for my family, that's motivation as well. And then I think on a bigger macro level, every startup I've built or the past few startups, even the ones that have failed, have always had a social impact um, um, angle to them, right? Where we're looking to improve people's lives, and that's kind of always been an underlying motivation as well. Like, the work that I'm doing here not only helps me personally and gives me some satisfaction on a personal level, and helps my family because I can provide for them financially, but it's also helping people. Like, this platform I'm building is giving people the opportunity to advance their lives and better themselves, whether it's get more gig work in Africa, right? As a person who has a CS degree or a design degree, and they can get more work and improve their lives, or someone removing an old mistake from their record and being able to have a fresh start. Those things motivate me for the most part.
Amazing. Roger, I really, really appreciate you spending some time with me today. It's actually very motivational to kind of hear you speak, just because of the purpose behind like the mission that you guys are on. So I wish you all the best in the success of LegalEase. I'm sure it's going to be amazing and continue to grow. And when you do that Africa trip, come back and tell us all about
Will
it,
do.
and we'd love to see how you grow.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bim. I appreciate it. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Thank you, Roger. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Legal Helm. Thank you as always for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps us out.